Hey everyone, Larry Wynn here with Bill. Bill, would you like to just give yourself a little introduction?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Bill Bassick. I'm the president of the College of Biomedical Equipment Technology. And pretty much what we do is we train the industry not only in biomedical repair, but also in IT. Thus, we're going to be discussing healthcare technology management as it is today and as it was in the past.
Awesome. Larry Wynn here, CEO and CTO of Summit Imaging. We're an ultrasound and mammography equipment support organization. We support healthcare facilities all over the world and supporting the HTMs to service their equipment to get it back up and running as quickly as possible. So kind of understanding, the value of the opportunity cost of downtime in being able to really curtail that risk and getting this equipment up and going so we can care for patients in a safe and reliable manner as quickly as possible. And so I think today what we really wanted to talk about is education in the HTM community. I think we're seeing a lot of need and demand around that. And Bill, I just want to ask you, what are you seeing and why, the College of Biomedical and Equipment Technology was started? What's your objective?
Well, one of the reasons that I started this college was I had a service company. I still have a service company that services hospitals throughout Texas. And I found it very difficult to find employees that were thoroughly trained once they were completed with school. So my idea on starting the school was to teach the student exactly what they need to know to become proficient the day that they're hired. They'll understand how the EOC committee works. They'll understand what's entailed in a biomed shop, how all the politics work in the hospital and how the cultures are, not just how to repair the equipment. And it seems to be real successful so far with that model.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. There's just so much education needed because the industry has really changed in the past, couple of decades. A decade ago, what were you seeing relative to today?
Well, a decade ago, what I saw was the original equipment manufacturer tended to hoard all of their education information that they had. They wanted to sell the hospital equipment, but did not want to provide training to the biomeds. They wanted their service company to do that. And what I've discovered in the past, and this has been proven, working with another OEM, which was Beckman Coulter, education is a cost center to the manufacturer. And if we were able to develop a system where schools such as mine can educate the service professional on product specific or general, it doesn't matter, then the original equipment manufacturer or the industry can hire these individuals knowing that they have the exact training that the OEM, which is the original equipment manufacturer, trains on, knowing that they understand that product just as an OEM technician would.
Yeah, and I think that was really the beginnings of HTM, where I think these healthcare facilities, just by virtue of equipment changing so much and becoming more sophisticated with gains in technology, that it was difficult to train at that point in time.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, the other problem that I've noticed was 10 years ago, we'd work on a device to the wall. So example, if we're working on a monitoring system and the monitoring system checks out and we know that there's still a problem, now because it goes into the wall, it got referred over to IT, who had to start their troubleshooting on it. And with HTM as we know it today, we're trying to incorporate both together where the biomedical technician is able to repair it as the IT technician would.
Yeah. And I think what I've heard from a lot of our healthcare facility customers is that the equipment serviceability has changed. And when they're specifically talking about that transition, it's really this transition away from individual boards failing electronically, and
Correct.
then they would just order the board and they'd replace it. I think what we're seeing now is a massive trend and really becoming the norm is this software piece that really
Yes,
was more of an afterthought kind of in ultrasound equipment that we know of 10 years ago. And now it's really it's the brains of the entire system, and the hardware has become secondary to that of the software that's running on top of it to give this awesome image quality that we've never seen before. If you could just kind of talk about, where we were in the past, but where has it brought us to today, and what the needs of students are, how they've changed from past to present, I think would give us some great context to understand what you're trying to accomplish with your curriculum today.
absolutely. As we're all aware of, there is going to be a big gap in the employment with HTM right now, and there's reasons which we'll get into later. But what I've noticed in the past on equipment was it was hardware driven, not software driven. You had to, I imagine there's probably 90% of shops now that have an O-scope in their shop, an oscilloscope, that's not being used now. It's on the shelf. I know because we have one that sits on our shelf. In the past, when we aligned things such as
If you have an
laser.
extra O-scope, you can send it to us. We need more of those.
Well, and I was going to get there, seeing how you're a remanufacturing plant. So, but we don't use those scopes anymore. Everything that used to be hardware driven, as you mentioned now, is software driven. So it enables our biomed technician to have to expand their own knowledge. So instead of worrying about how to replace things to the component level, which we don't really do anymore, we replace a board out, and 90% of the problems are software driven. So they have to know sequencing, how to network a little better than they used to. In the past, there was common joke with the hospitals where the biomed technician would come out of the basement and maybe a lab jacket and blue jeans and scrubs, and come out, grab a centrifuge and go back into the basement. That's the last you see of them. Today's HTM tech is a highly sophisticated professional individual that needs to know how to communicate with all the departments, has to be able to troubleshoot from a hardware point, from a software point, has to be able to delegate, understand. There's all kinds of things. There's 3 different levels of an HTM now that we're training them on. It's not just about repairing anymore. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think healthcare technology manager is really an appropriate title for current day professionals in healthcare that care for equipment, because what we've seen and where we've been successful is working on technology. And I think from what we're seeing, technology is not moving any slower. It is actually accelerating the change in the equipment, which therefore in effect will change at the same pace the needs of engineers that are out there servicing equipment. And the equipment now has so many different configurations for, just network configurations on what kind of networking infrastructures a healthcare facility may adopt. How do we make these devices work within that ecosystem? These type of devices have very sophisticated computers. How do I know it's not a electronic failure versus a software failure? Because if an HTM can't distinguish between the two, then you're elongating that downtime, which is becoming more and more valuable because healthcare facilities are now purchasing less equipment and making the smaller install base of the equipment that they do have more more widely used, and actually getting more workload into an individual device so they can meet some of the really tight financial objectives that they're trying to hit, which is then impacted by Medicare and Medicaid and all that, all that, and reimbursement programs that are becoming more and more stringent. So what that does is put pressure on the entire industry to do more of more. And so I'm thinking that as we kind of talk about where we were 10 years ago, where the industry is today, and kind of seeing this pretty quick drop in workforce, of HTMs, because in the last decade or so, there hasn't been a lot of formal education to displace really that baby boomer generation that's going to have a big retirement here pretty soon.
You're absolutely right. There have been other schools that attempted to do what we do online. I mean, we had a lot of flack about being an online school, but what makes us successful is understanding the need of the industry, the relationships that we establish, such as company as yourself. And based on these relationships, we're able to network and place our students across the country into jobs as far as the HTM. Biomed, as we know it, is going away. In 10 years from now, I believe it'll be all IT type of troubleshooting. It'll still be HTM. But you mentioned something very important earlier, and that was hospitals' budgets. We are driven by the budget. A lot of times a hospital say, we understand the quality, we still need to reduce the budget. So you and I, as healthcare technology providers, need to think outside of the box, explore different options to see what we can do to help our customer reduce their budget while at the same time increasing our quality. And by our alliances, such as what you and I have, is one of the few ways that we can do that and accomplish this.
Yeah. So I think, as we kind of talk about moving into the current present, I think the lack of investment in education for HTM is kind of putting us in a quandary as an industry in total, is that there's going to be less people within the workforce to care for this equipment. But I think there's also another headwind here, is that the number of devices that are entering healthcare facilities to serve patients is increasing.
Absolutely.
So, the demand is increasing because there's just more hardware to take care of. But number two, the workforce is decreasing. Therefore, there's got to be some sort of solution in the future for all of us as an industry to invest in, to ensure that patients are cared for the way that they're supposed to be cared for. So, what are the things that you're doing, kind of, planning for now, but then moving into the future to resolve really these two pretty big headwinds in our industry to help alleviate some of those growing pains?
That's a good question you have. I know that in the past, it was Biomed, and Biomed was considered working on beds, centrifuges, where most of the people that are the generations behind us wanted to get into IT. So that's where they all went. So we did a poor job in the industry as far as marketing what it is that we do. So what we're trying to do to change this is we're going to local high schools throughout our community and throughout the country with the help of organizations such as the AMI to show them this is what our healthcare profession is. It is not just biomed, it is programming and getting to mess with IT and computers to understand that. And what we're trying to do is make awareness to gain the interest of younger people into this industry. And that's where we're starting off now. We're also going to other organizations for people getting out of the military to explain to them, because they have their education paid for. Here's what you can get into, and you can virtually work anywhere in the country in this profession. So it's a great profession to be in as far as being very diverse where you want to live.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've chatted about offline, but I think because of the demand increasing for this type of position in the future, but really the labor force decreasing because of all the massive retirement,
Right.
The market forces kind of come into play here, which is what do you see for salaries of these students when you're coming out of college? I have to imagine that the salaries are much more competitive, or the compensation packages from healthcare facilities are much more competitive than they used to be.
It's funny you mentioned that. We went to a healthcare organization to cross-train their biomeds into IT, and their biggest fear was that they were going to jump ship because of higher salary pay, which is not so much the case. What the industry needs to do, when I say industry, I'm talking about hospitals, that's our bulk of our customers. They need to revisit the scope of work that the biomed technician is doing now, understand it's changing to HTM, and adjust the salaries accordingly. and then they won't have a problem with that. But I do know, based on our own numbers that we have to report to our accreditation, that just from a 6-month certificate, the salaries that we're seeing is starting from 38,000 all the way up to 48,000, and with the associates, they start out around 45 to 85. That's starting pay.
Yeah, and I think from what we're seeing over here, in speaking to all of our customers who are, HTM Tech healthcare facilities, is that this is almost a trend that we see chasing that of software engineers back in, kind of the late 90s, where it was kind of this oddball type of position. And then all of a sudden the demand exploded for it. And then all of a sudden salaries started really climbing around that. So that's kind of our insight. We could be wrong, but just based on the market forces here, just supply and demand of this very valuable skill, and the skill that's going to continue to evolve very quickly for the HTM community.
I agree. I think one of the ways that the hospital can reduce their budget is by investing in education to their HTM departments, IT, biomed, probably consolidating them. Yeah, they'll spend money up front on that education, but it'll pay dividends back to them in the future by having their healthcare professionals that understand technology say, through all this education they received, they're able to help reduce the overall budget by being able to take devices and consolidate them, understanding which companies work together. The biggest issue we still face today is the original equipment manufacturers don't want to give up any of that information, which is sad because no one's really going to compete against them. It'll actually help them the more information they give to the hospitals. It'll help on downtime. Because our bottom line is patient safety. That's what your job is, and my job is to ensure patient safety at its highest standard. And
let's dive into that for a second, because I think one of the other, I wouldn't call it a headwind, but really an expectation that's continuing to rise, that is a pretty hot topic right now in the HTM community, is the scrutinization of service and how that impacts patient care. This was just recently at Washington, D.C. We were at the meeting, contributing to that. There was another one in Chicago. That was a privately held meeting. We were invited to that as well, just to share really the awareness that the FDA has around service and how that impacts the safety and reliability of the equipment that's touching patients. How's that impacting how you're structuring your curriculum there and how you're preparing your students? Because the regulations have always been there, but it seems like as of recently, the regulations are now being really scrutinized to begin holding healthcare facilities and third-party companies accountable for patient safety.
Absolutely. There's what we do in our industry, and what we do to teach the student is to make sure that they follow the standards provided by the manufacturer. Don't take any shortcuts. I mean, shortcuts, you can get something repaired, bring it back into service. However, there's a risk involved. Don't take the shortcut. If you have to, you let the people know, the director, that you can't use, let's say, the Da Vinci, for example. There's a safety cord that has a cut in it, or a plug that has a cut, and this is something that just recently happened. The doctor wanted to put it in service and do a surgery, and we had to pull it, despite all the rhetoric we were going to hear from it afterwards. But bottom line is, we pulled the robot, no surgery was committed, and the OEM came in, repaired the cord, and it was business as usual after that. What we find is that individuals that are new in the industry are kind of fearful to stand their ground when they know something's right and they're being challenged by doctors or administration. They have to understand, here are the liabilities. If you want us to do this, here's the risks that you have to be aware to take. So we teach our students to be strong in what they know in a respectful manner. Got it.
I think that just kind of reinforces the point that the industry is changing, and that there is so much more coworker and peer interaction for an HTM relative to the past, which was, more strictly engineering and replacing some boards to resolve a failure. But I think kind of moving into the problems of today and the problems that we see in the future, kind of the meat and potatoes of this conversation is, now that we've talked thoroughly about the headwinds that this industry faces, and some of the solutions that we're seeing, what's going to happen in your eyes in the next 5 to 10 years? And what are you doing today to preemptively prepare our industry to resolve and navigate these hurdles that you see coming?
That's a really good question, Larry. What we're doing right now is we're identifying the needs of the industry. Every trade show that we go to, we find out what certain needs are with certain areas. They're different from region to region. And based on their needs, we try to align ourselves with the proper companies to receive their training. If they invented the model, we want to know what their training is, their curriculum. And then from there, we disperse that information to our students so they have the latest and greatest training. So we're always updating our own education training needs that we have for the students as technology changes. And as you said, this is a quick changing technology industry. By the time we're done with this meeting, it's already changed a little bit. But one of the great things that we're doing now is, because we've had so much criticism on an online school, is we're actually in the early stages of virtual reality development on biomedical equipment, where they're able to repair and take apart a piece of equipment pretty much in their own home through the lenses that we have, the oculi or the other ones. We're looking at some different technologies where they can move their hand across the screen. We have already in IT, but on the biomed side as well, because it'd be hard to send 300 goggles across the country and have them do that. But in a lot of instances, we'll be doing group training for the hospitals, even on equipment such as yourself. On ultrasound, that's one of the pieces of equipment we wanted to take and be one of the first top 10 pieces of equipment for the virtual reality training. And we're working with companies on that right now.
Got it. I think where we see the industry going is, I think it's inevitable. We're going to see more IOMT technology.
Yes.
And the reason being is that if you can have software monitor the equipment and report, failures, or even better, preemptive failures, then it takes the capacity of the current HTM workforce and it can actually put multiples on that capacity. Because traditionally what happens today is that if there's a failure reported, in ultrasound, a sonographer would call the engineer or the HTM, and the HTM would physically show up with the machine and try to diagnose the issue and understand if it's a software issue, is it hardware? If it's hardware, where do I need to get this piece of hardware to bring this machine back up to life? We're working on IOMT technologies right now that we want to eliminate that first diagnostic call. So that is actually deployed to somebody's cell phone, and that's an HTM, and they could actually immediately know exactly the accurate failure code, when it happened, and be notified as quickly as possible to then make a decision on, do they need to arrive and service it right away to bring the machine back up and going, or forego the diagnostics because they already have all the information to diagnose, and just order the correct replacement part right then and there, to then just arrive once at the machine physically and perform the actual service and bring the machine up as soon as the part comes in on the.
No, you bring up a good point. We're working with some database companies now that have lifetime database. So they're actually tracking the piece of equipment just like ECRI does, and it informs us of how long this equipment lasts before it has a failure. It lets us know exactly if a laser is getting weaker than it was a week ago. And these databases are going to be great tools for the HTM professional in the future to rely on and to help them make informed decisions and to alleviate that first call, as you were mentioning.
Yeah, and the reason why we think it's important is because if we see a drop off of, let's just throw a random number out there, in the next 10 years, 40% of the HTMs retire. If we can take that remaining 60% of the HTMs that are still in the workplace and we double that with technology, their capacity, then we've been able to reach at least equilibrium to keep all the equipment going in at least North America here. That kind of what I'm talking about, just with software. So I think that's just a really you know a clear path for where healthcare technology is going to be going, and wanted to share that that's part of the reason why that we're working with the College of Biomedical Equipment and Technology, is that we wanted to take this knowledge and share it with the HTM community through education, because that's something I think that it's going to be expected, is to resolve connectivity issues of these devices. So as IOMT, it's growing at a rapid clip right now, and it's going to be, I think, a requirement of the job is to satisfy connectivity issues, right? And so I think that's kind of what we've been kind of alluding to this whole conversation, is this uh, codification of IT and HTM is going to become so tight that you're probably not going to see a bright line between the two departments in the next 10 years.
You're absolutely right, which brings me to my next point. Currently, there's numerous biomed departments that report to facilities. We're going to have a 40% gap of employment coming up here in the very near future. So as the biomed departments align themselves with the IT department / becoming HTM, that workforce gap can be almost alleviated if you combine the technology. So you train some of the IT people to understand biomed a little better, train biomeds to be certified on 3 different things: cybersecurity and networking, A+, A++. Now they can bridge that gap of the decrease of employment for the future that we're going to be missing out on.
Yeah. And so I think one other piece that I wanted to chat about is the competitive nature that employers are going to have around HTMs in the future as the supply of HTMs decreases. And so I kind of want to increase the aperture of the conversation and actually bring all OEMs and all third parties into that conversation as well, because there's a lot of third party and OEM service organizations that are fighting for these exact same skills for them to serve their own contracts with healthcare facilities to manage equipment. So what are you seeing as you're getting students into your program? And I think one of the biggest benefits that you provided to the community is you're able to deploy them to the workforce almost immediately after they're done with your program. So kudos to you and your team out there for placing. Where are you seeing the placements, and where do you see the competitive nature of those placements being in the next couple of years?
Well, that's a good question you bring up. As far as the placements, they're all over the country. It varies from one graduating class to the next, but we're not just limited to the United States. This is worldwide. This need is worldwide, and we're providing services to people in Africa right now, the Philippines, everywhere. As far as the competitiveness as the OEM, I think if they go on board with an institution as ours, they won't have any competition, because the more information that you teach someone on, the easier it is to employ them. So if they're going to hoard their own information and not share it, then they're always going to have that competition because they're afraid to share information. The more that your company and our company shares information, I think the less competitiveness is. The job market will be wide open for anyone who wants it. If you do the job according to the way you're supposed to do it, you're not going to have competition, and you'll always have a job. So I don't look at it as being too much competition out there doing the right thing. It's just the way that the OEM looks at it, and that's what we have to change their mindset to.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a lot of unpacking to do around the past on education. There's a lot of positions, and a lot of really strong positions on what the OEM's responsibility is on education and information disclosure to healthcare facilities. And I really don't want to get into that, because
Right.
we don't have a horse in that race. But more importantly, I think it's clear as day that when we look backwards, that we are now in a position to either innovate as an industry together and move forward,
Correct.
or suffer some severe growing pains because of the lack of the decreasing workforce at an alarming rate right now, because of the lack of investment in education in the past. And
Right.
so it is a couple of different things. It could be the availability of education. It could be the withholding of information because education was viewed as a competitive threat.
Right.
It could be many different things, but regardless of the intention and regardless of the reason, I think we're in the same position today, no matter what. And I think we need to recognize that, which is, I think, an aggressive investment in technology, and in parallel, an aggressive investment in education and in
Right.
people is the only way that we're going to reach equilibrium. And then very potentially, with a smaller workforce, actually increase the overall capacity of HTM with the use of some awesome software that can
Absolutely.
and can support these HTMs that are coming out. Because in my mind, the HTM today coming out of college is so more densely packed with knowledge because they have to be.
Correct.
They have to understand networking. They have to understand the digital ecosystem that all these imaging devices operate in. They have to understand an operating system. They have to understand so many more things than simply replacing a PCB or replacing a card. And so I think that deficit, we're working from a deficit right now, but I think it's, as long as the industry comes together and we work together moving forward, I think it's pretty bright on what we can do with the limited resources that we have.
I agree. One thing to make the hospitals aware of, not HTMs, but OEMs are lobbying right now that nobody's able to work on their equipment unless they're OEM trained, or if it's the OEM themselves, which is not going to reduce the budget for the hospitals. So I encourage everyone out there that's involved somewhat in this type of politics from our technology point of view to get out there and make it known, make your voice be heard, that it's not just the OEM that can work on the equipment. With proper training, any HTM person can work on a piece of, at least to do first call, to help reduce the budget for the hospitals.
Yeah, and I think that's a big conversation. We've been a part of several of them, and it really comes down to and we need to distill all these conversations down, removing any business in healthcare. The argument is always, is the technician qualified to work on the equipment? And I think what's really hard about these types of conversations is that it's really a moving target depending on the person you're having the conversation with. There's
Correct.
some that are saying, well, they're not trained by this OEM to work on this device, but they're trained in the modality in general. For us, our optic is so much larger than that, where we see software is software. It's all zeros and ones.
Right.
Hardware, it's all it's digital or analog. A cap's a cap, a resistor's a resistor. It doesn't matter what type of device it is. When you boil all of this technology down, whether it's an imaging device, whether it's a computer, whether it's a child's toy that's electronics, it's all the same. And so I think that something that we bring that's very unique to the community is that optic and the expertise of both those domains to be able to service the equipment for our healthcare facility customers to get them back up and going. So I think that's something that's pretty special that you're trying to accomplish at your college as well. It is just instead of being very myopic in what you work on, it's actually a broader philosophy of it's electronics, it's software.
Exactly.
Moving from one device to another, it's very, very similar, if not almost the same, just using a different type of physical properties to obtain some sort of information, right? So, ultrasound uses sound, mammography uses X-ray, but in its most basic form on data flow and functionality, they're both cameras. One uses X-ray,
Absolutely.
one uses sound, and a camera uses light for a sensor. So, that's how we look at technology and how we're able to expand what we do here. And I think that's what you're trying to teach
Yeah.
us.
In addition to your company, you have an outstanding company in ultrasound. One of the things that separates you from other ultrasound companies, and this is from my perspective, because I'm going to tie it in with our school as well, is not only are you good at what you do, but there's a trust factor that customers have with your company. When they think of Summit, they think of quality, trust, and relationships. That comes from who you are as a person, who your team is. So when we come out there as a school, and we're fairly new, people want to see if they can actually trust us before they establish a relationship with us. So therefore, it takes a little longer for our online school to get that momentum, which we're getting right now. People are saying, wow, you've been out there for over a year, you're doing well. We placed 100 graduates this year. That's unheard of for the first year.
Wow.
Our target is 150 for the next year. And these are all graduates that have a good reputation in the industry. Now, mind you, there are technicians that are already biomeds, they just need their formal education. But out of these 100 graduates, we've had 40% of them that were green, new to the field, and they're doing well because they're getting that proper education, but they're being trustworthy and they're establishing relationships. And from there, the rest falls in place. And that's where we have to kind of have that paradigm shift with how we change our industry as we see it.
Well, thank you for the compliments. Definitely wasn't expected, but we just want to share as much of our information that we've discovered as possible to empower HTM. At the end of the day, HTM and healthcare facilities, those are our customers. So the more that we can empower them, the better that we can remotely serve them from our headquarters here up in Washington State. So, that's really important to us to extend these skills, these tools, these software tools that we're building to them to build that relationship, build trust. And then I think the performance that, we're able to achieve with them really build some really lifelong relationships and lifelong customers that we're so appreciative for. So I think, really at the end of this, the shaping of this community is going to be dictated by, technology and more technologists from, institutions like yours to be able to service that technology. And it'd be interesting to have this same type of conversation in 2 years, because I have a sneaking suspicion that the industry is going to change faster than we expect it to. And the reason why I say that is because it has to.
Right.
So you're going to see a lot of new innovative things coming to market. You're probably going to see a lot of ways to help optimize HTM to increase capacity. So I really look forward to seeing what's going on, because it's really going to set apart really those innovators in the industry versus those who are just kind of plunking along just to do what they do today. Unfortunately, I think this is a point where we all must make an adjustment, and we all must change forward to be successful here. And if we don't do it as a group, then we got some more headwinds we need to talk about.
Exactly. But that's one of the core of our mission statement is building trust and meeting the needs of the healthcare industry. If we don't have the trust, we're not going to meet the needs.
Yeah, I think something we share is everything that we do here at Summit, and I think everything you do there at your school is driven by the customer. Nothing more, nothing less. So we listen very much to our customers, and they tell us what they need, and then we go to work, and we build solutions to resolve some of the issues that they have.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's an honor to be affiliated with a company as yours in the education.
Yep. Same. All right. Well, thank you so much, Bill, for taking the time and chatting with us about what you're doing in education. Summit, we're a part of the education. We're working with the college to innovate some of the curriculum to integrate some more technology advancement, exposure, and service there. And then we're just really excited to share all the information that we can to empower the HTM community. So, Bill, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you,
everyone, thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar, and we'll talk to you guys later. All right, thanks.
Take care.
Bye.